Imagine a world suspended in twilight, a world on the edge of discovery, centuries before the age of maps, compasses, and global empires. The Atlantic Ocean stretches before us like a vast sheet of dark glass, reflecting the cold stars that guided the earliest sailors into the unknown. Long before Columbus set foot on the deck of the Santa Maria, long before the familiar timeline of discovery hardened into schoolbook certainty, there existed whispers, rumors, and secrets that refused to die. Secrets tied to one of the most enigmatic groups in all of history, the Knights Templar. Tonight, we drift slowly into a tale that feels almost too strange to belong to the official record, and yet too persistent, too detailed, too eerily consistent to dismiss outright. For generations, stories have circulated about ancient voyages across the Atlantic. Voyages carried out not by Vikings, not by lost explorers of legend, but by a powerful order of warrior monks whose symbol, the Red Cross, once struck fear and awe across medieval Europe. According to these whispers, the Templars may have sailed westward, beyond the horizon, long before Columbus ever dreamed of the New World. Most historians dismiss such claims as fantasy, but history, as we know, is written by survivors and by victors. And sometimes, what survives is less a complete record than a carefully shaped memory. Our story begins not with evidence, but with curiosity, the type of curiosity that arises when you notice something just slightly out of place. Ancient stones in Nova Scotia carved with crosses that should not exist. European symbols etched onto American rock faces centuries before European contact. Maps that seem to display coastlines no medieval cartographer should have known. And legends, old, unsteady, whispered legends, speaking of pale-skinned warriors who arrived from the sea, bearing strange armor and sacred symbols. Each clue is small, on its own, easily dismissed, but when placed together, they form a constellation of anomalies too bright to ignore. Imagine yourself listening to this story in the quiet hours of the night, the world around you slow and still. As your breathing softens, the past begins to stir, shadows moving in dusty archives, half-forgotten maps resting under glass, stories murmured by old sailors in dimly lit taverns. There is something intoxicating about mysteries that challenge the official version of events. Something deeply human in wanting to know what might be hidden, erased, or deliberately buried. And the Templars, those legendary guardians of relics, secrets, and forbidden knowledge, have always occupied that strange boundary between history and myth. They were real, unquestionably real. Knights, bankers, pilgrims, architects, warriors. But there were also something more. From medieval chronicles to modern conspiracy theories, the Templars have been described as protectors of ancient wisdom, custodians of relics tied to the Holy Land, and explorers driven by a destiny beyond ordinary human ambition. So when the idea emerges that they may have crossed the Atlantic, it does not feel as impossible as it should. Picture the scene. The year is 1307. Europe is trembling. The Templar order, once untouchable, is suddenly hunted. Their leaders are arrested, their lands seized, their secrets threatened. But according to some accounts, their fleet, the ships that had carried them through the Crusades, mysteriously vanishes. They are there one day and gone the next. No wreckage, no records, no certainty, only silence. Where did they go? Some say they hid in Scotland. Others claim they merged with early Freemasons. But there is another possibility, one that lingers in the darker corners of historical speculation, that the surviving Templars fled west, following ancient knowledge, old maps, or secret routes passed down through whispered traditions. Tonight, we follow that possibility, not claiming with certainty, not declaring with authority, but imagining with curiosity. Because sometimes the truth lies not in what is proven, but in what refuses to disappear. As the waves rise and fall beneath an unseen moon, we step aboard a Templar ship, or at least the idea of one. Heavy timbers creak, lanterns flicker, men stand at the rail, their white mantles catching the wind, the red cross glowing faintly in the moonlight. They are not simply escaping persecution. They are traveling with purpose. They're carrying something, treasure, knowledge, relics, or something more abstract and powerful. Something too valuable to fall into the hands of kings. But could such a voyage have been possible? Could medieval sailors cross the Atlantic in the early 1300s? The official answer is no. But history is crowded with unofficial answers. Answers carved into rock, hinted at in old manuscripts, implied by artifacts that seem to defy their own timelines. And in this quiet space, as you drift deeper into the story, those boundaries begin to soften. The ocean grows wider, the horizon grows darker, and the question grows louder, echoing through the centuries. Did the Knights Templar reach America before Columbus? Tonight, we begin that journey, not to prove or disprove, but to explore, to connect the threads, the clues, the scattered remnants of a mystery that refuses to fade. Settle in. Let the world calm around you. Let the distant sound of waves guide your imagination. The story is long, the night is patient, and the truth, whatever it may be, waits somewhere beyond the next horizon. In the dimly lit courts of medieval Europe, a new kind of order was taking shape, one that would leave a mark on history far larger than most could imagine. The Knights Templar began as a small group of warriors, humble in numbers but ambitious in purpose, founded to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Their beginnings were modest, almost unremarkable. 9 knights, poor, devoted, and disciplined, bound together by a sacred vow, took up the cross in a world torn apart by war and religious fervor. It was not long before the Templars transcended their humble origins. Through acts of valor on the battlefield, strict adherence to discipline, and an unshakable reputation for loyalty, they gained the trust of kings, popes, and wealthy patrons. Donations poured in from across Europe: lands, castles, fleets of ships, and vast sums of gold. In a surprisingly short time, the Templars became more than soldiers. They became financiers, engineers, and advisors to the highest powers in Christendom. The rise of their power was almost magical. They established an intricate network of fortresses stretching from Jerusalem to the coasts of France. Their castles were not just military strongholds, but centers of administration, finance, and intelligence. Couriers on horseback carried messages that could alter the course of kingdoms. They became a force that could move gold and armies across continents with an efficiency that rivals modern logistics. Few could match their influence, and even fewer dared to oppose them. But what made the Templars truly extraordinary was their secretive nature. Initiates underwent rigorous trials, learning not only combat but also codes, rituals, and esoteric knowledge. This secrecy bred myth almost as quickly as history. Whispers spread of forbidden texts, hidden relics, and knowledge that could shift the balance of power. To outsiders, the Templars became not just a military order, but a symbol of mystery, power, and fear. By the late 12th century, the Templars had become guardians of treasure and relics, their coffers swelling with wealth unmatched by kings. They were entrusted with gold from across Europe, transported in convoys that would inspire legends of secret vaults and lost treasures. It was said that no knight in Christendom carried more authority than a Templar who held the trust of the Pope. And with this authority came opportunity, not merely to influence events in Europe or the Holy Land, but perhaps to explore the unknown. Their knowledge of maps, trade routes, and distant lands became legendary. While most of Europe still relied on hearsay, and hearsay alone to navigate the seas, the Templars developed early navigational tools, meticulous charts, and coded instructions for safe passage. They were, in many ways, the pioneers of early global awareness, quietly amassing intelligence that rivaled entire empires. A Templar who knew the seas could travel farther than most kings ever dreamed. And then there were the relics, the objects of obsession that set the Templars apart from other orders. From fragments of the true cross to sacred texts, the Templars were believed to guard items of profound spiritual significance. Some accounts suggest they were more than mere guardians. They were seekers of hidden truths, possibly entrusted with knowledge of ancient civilizations, lost continents, or even preternatural secrets. The exact nature of these relics has been lost to time, but the reverence with which they were treated fueled speculation. If the Templars could protect such treasures across continents, could they also have sought new lands to safeguard or explore? Their influence extended beyond the battlefield or the bank vault. The Templars became advisors to rulers, architects of formidable fortifications, and financiers of entire crusades. They were credited with innovations in banking that allowed pilgrims and nobles to safely move wealth across thousands of miles. In a sense, they were the lifeblood of a medieval Europe that was only beginning to stretch its reach across the known world. Their knowledge of logistics, combined with their disciplined secrecy, made them uniquely capable of undertaking ventures that others might deem impossible. Perhaps even voyages to lands far across the Atlantic, hidden from the eyes of ordinary men. Yet with all this power came enemies. Rival monarchs grew envious of their wealth, and the papacy, at times, both feared and relied upon them. By the early 14th century, the Templars were no longer simply a military order. They were a political entity whose very existence threatened the ambitions of kings and princes. It was this combination of power, secrecy, and ambition that set the stage for both their mysterious downfall and the tantalizing question of what they might have achieved in secret. The Templars' rise, in other words, was not just a story of martial prowess. It was a story of intelligence networks, far-reaching influence, and an almost obsessive mastery over information, movement, and wealth. Their skills were not confined to Europe or the Holy Land. If any medieval order could secretly launch a voyage across an unknown ocean, the Templars had the means, the knowledge, and the motivation to do so. And so, as we consider the possibility that they may have sailed west, we must first understand the full measure of who they were. They were not merely knights in armor. They were visionaries, logisticians, bankers, explorers, and keepers of secrets. The kind of people who could vanish from one continent and leave traces that would puzzle historians for centuries. To trace the footsteps of the Templars is to step into a world of both brilliance and danger, of knowledge and suppression. It is to walk alongside men whose ambition was as grand as the oceans they may have crossed, and whose courage was matched only by their obsession with what lay beyond the known world. In this context, the question begins to take shape not as idle speculation, but as a plausible thread in the tapestry of history. Could the Templars, in the fullness of their power and secrecy, have turned their gaze westward and crossed the Atlantic long before Columbus? By 1307, the Templar order had reached a pinnacle of power that few could rival and even fewer dared challenge. Their castles were impregnable, their coffers overflowing, their fleets of ships and networks of couriers stretching across Europe and the Mediterranean. They had become more than a religious military order. They were a force unto themselves, capable of influencing kings, shaping policy, and moving vast sums of wealth with precision. But with great power comes great vulnerability, and power as concentrated and secretive as the Templars inevitably attracted envy, fear, and suspicion. King Philip IV of France, known to history as Philip the Fair, is often remembered as ruthless, cunning, and deeply in debt to the Templars. He owed vast sums to their banking networks and envied the political influence they wielded. For Philip, The Templars represented both a threat and an opportunity, an obstacle that could be removed, a wealth that could be seized, and a reputation he could strengthen by vanquishing one of the most powerful organizations in Christendom. And so, on a cold Friday morning in October 1307, Philip's men executed a carefully orchestrated plan that would change the course of history: the mass arrest of the Templars. Across France, knights were dragged from their beds, accused of heresy, blasphemy, and unspeakable crimes. Many were tortured, coerced into confessions that would justify their execution. Grand Master Jacques de Molay and other leaders were imprisoned, and soon, the order itself was officially dissolved by papal decree. To the outside world, this was a triumph of justice over corruption, a righteous punishment of men who had overstepped their bounds. But those who looked closer saw something far more complex: a sudden vacuum of power, the disappearance of one of the most secretive organizations in the world, and the unexplained vanishing of their treasure and records. The dissolution of the Templars did not happen quietly. Chroniclers recorded tales of lost wealth, secret scrolls, and rumors that some knights had escaped the king's grasp. Entire fleets disappeared from the records, ships that had once carried gold and knights seemingly evaporating into the mists of history. Was it merely coincidence, or was it the calculated foresight of an order that had long mastered secrecy and cunning? The very qualities that had made the Templars so formidable may have now allowed them to vanish, leaving only tantalizing traces for future generations to puzzle over. Some historians argue that the Templars went underground, merging with other secret societies or fleeing to remote regions of Europe. Scotland, Portugal, and even the Iberian Peninsula have all been suggested as havens for the surviving knights. But there is another possibility, whispered in the corners of obscure texts and passed along by local legends, that some Templars took to the sea, leaving Europe entirely behind. They would not simply be hiding from kings. They would be seeking something new, a place beyond the reach of their enemies, and perhaps beyond the edge of the known world. The sudden suppression of the Templars adds an almost cinematic layer to this theory. One moment, they were the most powerful order in Christendom. The next, they were hunted, dissolved, and for all practical purposes erased. Yet, if we consider the Templars' history of daring, intelligence, and secrecy, it is not hard to imagine that a portion of their order anticipated the fall and acted accordingly. Ships could have been loaded in secret with gold, relics, and documents, treasures not merely material, but intellectual and spiritual, the kind that would require centuries to fully comprehend. Stories of escape and secret voyages abound. Legends speak of Templar ships that disappeared from European ports, never to be seen again. Some say they sailed north to Scotland and Scandinavia. Others claim westward into the Atlantic. These tales are fragmentary, often conflicting, and frequently dismissed by mainstream scholars. Yet the very persistence of such legends, carved into stone, recorded in chronicles, whispered in coastal villages, suggests that something extraordinary occurred. Whether fact, myth, or a blend of both, these stories refuse to disappear. And then there is the psychological element to consider. The Templars were trained to survive and to protect secrets at all costs. They understood the value of information, the power of myth, and the utility of misdirection. It is plausible, even likely, that in the chaos of their suppression, a calculated portion of the order chose to disappear entirely, leaving behind misleading traces to confuse pursuers. They had the ships, the knowledge, the discipline, and the resources to attempt what most of Europe would have considered impossible: a secret voyage across the ocean to a land unknown. This vanishing act also serves as a dramatic turning point in our narrative. It marks the end of the Templars as a visible force in Europe, but perhaps the beginning of a new chapter, one that may have stretched across oceans. The suppression was both a crisis and an opportunity, a violent rupture in history that allowed for stories of hidden treasures, secret maps, and unknown voyages to take root. It is the very tension between public destruction and private survival that makes the Templars' legacy so compelling, so enigmatic, and so enduringly mysterious. As we trace these threads, it becomes clear that the dissolution of the Templars is not merely a story of persecution or political maneuvering. It is a story of disappearance, of masters of secrecy vanishing from the historical record in ways that continue to provoke curiosity and speculation. And it is in this silence, this gap in the timeline, that the question begins to take shape. If some Templars survived, if they escaped the grasp of kings and popes, where did they go? Could they have taken to the sea, following ancient knowledge or secret maps, and crossed the Atlantic long before Columbus? The suppression of the order leaves us with fragments, whispers, and shadows. Stones with mysterious markings, chronicles hinting at hidden voyages, and legends of pale knights arriving from the horizon. The historical record may have ended their story in Europe, but the possibility remains that elsewhere, beyond the charts of their enemies, beyond the edges of contemporary maps, the Templars continued, quietly, invisibly, and perhaps extraordinarily. The notion of lost voyages across the Atlantic begins not only in stories or whispers, but also in the maps that survived, or perhaps were deliberately hidden. Maps are more than instruments for navigation. They're a reflection of knowledge, curiosity, and sometimes secrets that someone wanted to preserve while the rest of the world remained ignorant. In the centuries before Columbus, Europe had few accurate representations of distant lands. Coastlines were vague, continents were mythical, and the ocean was a terrifying expanse. And yet, among the scribbled parchments and carefully drawn charts of the medieval period, there are anomalies, strange coastlines, unexplained islands, and geographical details that suggest knowledge beyond what historians typically admit existed at the time. Take, for instance, the Vinland map. First surfacing in the 20th century, this controversial document purportedly shows a part of North America, labeled Vinland, centuries before Columbus. Its authenticity has been debated endlessly, yet it captures the imagination because, if genuine, it would indicate that someone in the 15th century knew of lands far to the west. Who might that someone have been? Scholars have proposed Norse explorers, wandering mariners, and perhaps secretive groups like the Templars. And what makes this idea compelling is not only the possibility of the map itself, but the meticulousness of its details, which suggest knowledge gathered through careful observation or even first-hand experience. Another curious example is the Piri Reis map, drawn by an Ottoman admiral in 1513. While this map postdates Columbus, it is notable because it compiles data from much older sources, some of which seem to have captured parts of the Americas before Europeans were supposed to have known of them. The map includes coastlines that fit modern South America with startling accuracy, leading some researchers to speculate that the information it contains may have originated from secret voyages long before 1492. Could these sources have been survivors of the Templar fleet, carrying knowledge from Europe to lands far across the Atlantic, carefully preserving it from prying eyes? Then there are the enigmatic portal-on charts, detailed navigational maps used by medieval mariners. Most of these maps focus on the Mediterranean and the Atlantic coast of Europe and Africa, yet some charts contain anomalies that suggest knowledge of islands or coastlines not officially discovered in that era. Scholars have debated whether these errors are mistakes, imaginative speculation, or encoded clues deliberately left to mislead outsiders. If the latter is true, the Templars, masters of secrecy, codes, and hidden knowledge, are strong candidates for the creators or guardians of such charts. Their expertise in navigation, coupled with access to maps from the Crusades and trade networks, could have allowed them to chart lands unseen by most of Europe. But maps are not the only clues. Ancient maritime logs, fragmented chronicles, and oral traditions hint at voyages to unknown lands. In some documents, scribes make passing references to pale-skinned men from the west or ships arriving from beyond the horizon. Though these references are often cryptic, easily dismissed, or erased from official records. These fragments suggest a tantalizing possibility that knowledge of lands across the Atlantic was circulating, at least within certain secretive circles, long before the age of exploration became a historical certainty. Even the locations of known Templar holdings and fortresses suggest a sophisticated understanding of geography. From coastal ports in Portugal to river fortresses in France, the Templars maintained a network that allowed them to deploy ships, transport gold, and relay intelligence across Europe. Some researchers speculate that these ports could have served as staging points for far-reaching expeditions. If the Templars had reason, spiritual, financial, or strategic, to seek lands beyond the known world, their infrastructure would have made it possible. They were, in many ways, uniquely equipped to attempt voyages that would have been nearly impossible for ordinary medieval sailors. It is also worth considering the culture of secrecy surrounding the Templars. They were bound by oaths, rituals, and codes that emphasized the protection of knowledge. Some of this knowledge was practical: maps, navigation techniques, and financial records. Some of it was mystical: religious symbolism, relics, and arcane teachings that outsiders could not interpret. In a world where revealing too much could mean death or ruin, encoded maps and secret charts would have been a natural way to preserve information about lands that the outside world was not ready to know about. Could the anomalies we see in these maps be remnants of such hidden knowledge, carefully preserved by Templar hands? Contrast this with mainstream history, which maintains that Europe had no concrete knowledge of the Americas before Columbus. This conventional view relies on the assumption that the Atlantic was a forbidding, largely uncharted wilderness. Yet when we examine the anomalies, the maps, and the whispered accounts together, a different picture emerges. One where the Templars, masters of both practical and esoteric knowledge, may have ventured west, charted coastlines, and preserved their findings in ways that remained secret for centuries. Even if we cannot prove these voyages, the possibility itself reshapes how we think about pre-Columbian exploration. It suggests a network of knowledge, deliberate secrecy, and daring exploration that was at once human and almost mythic. The Templars, with their combination of ambition, resources, and skill, could have been the ones to step into the unknown, carrying not only men and ships, but also a treasure trove of knowledge, maps, relics, and insights that would have allowed them to navigate a vast and unpredictable ocean. And here, the tension begins to build. We are not merely looking at maps or legends in isolation. We are tracing a constellation of clues that intersect across centuries, continents, and disciplines. Each anomaly, each unusual chart, each fragmentary account is a breadcrumb leading us toward a possibility so bold it challenges our understanding of history. The Templars, it seems, left behind hints of their journeys in places where few would notice, waiting for centuries for someone patient enough and curious enough to follow the trail. The Atlantic stretches wide before us in imagination, as it did before Columbus. Somewhere in that expanse lies the mystery of what the Templars may have known, where they may have sailed, and what secrets they carried with them. And as we drift along the currents of history, examining the maps, the anomalies, and the subtle traces they left behind, we begin to feel the faint pulse of a story that refuses to be contained, a story that hints at daring voyages, hidden knowledge, and the tantalizing possibility that the world we think we know was only one version of reality. The story of the Templars is incomplete without the Grail, the ultimate symbol of mystery, faith, and hidden knowledge. Unlike gold or relics of material value, the Grail represents a quest that transcends the physical, a pursuit of divine insight sacred power, or perhaps knowledge too dangerous or profound to be shared openly. For the Templars, the Grail was not merely legend. It was an obsession, a reason to explore, to protect, and to conceal. And in the context of secret voyages across uncharted waters, the Grail provides a compelling motive: the search for a place where such sacred treasures could be hidden, preserved, or even discovered anew. Legends of the Grail are as old as medieval Europe itself. Stories spoke of a cup, a stone, or even a mystical vessel capable of bestowing spiritual enlightenment, divine favor, or immortality. Some tales claimed it was the cup from which Christ drank at the Last Supper, imbued with miraculous powers. Others hinted at a more abstract treasure, a key to ancient wisdom, a conduit to lost knowledge, or a symbol that encoded secrets of the divine and the universe. For the Templars, guardians of both the sacred and the secret, the Grail was more than myth. It was purpose, destiny, and perhaps justification for feats that would seem impossible to ordinary men. This obsession with the Grail may have shaped the Templars' choices in ways we can barely imagine. If we accept that they were protectors of hidden knowledge, it becomes plausible that they would venture into unknown lands in search of new locations to safeguard relics or to uncover truths lost to the sands of time. The Grail could have been a reason to sail westward, beyond the boundaries of known maps, into the mysterious and uncharted Atlantic. For an order devoted to secrecy and preservation, the threat posed by kings, inquisitors, and rivals would have made the establishment of remote sanctuaries not only desirable but necessary. Some historians and researchers suggest that the Templars' obsession with relics was not purely spiritual. It was also strategic. Sacred objects carried power in a society that measured authority through symbols and faith. Possession of the Grail, or knowledge of its location, would elevate the order beyond mere knights and bankers into something almost untouchable, a force capable of shaping the spiritual and political landscape of Europe. And when threats arose, as they inevitably did, the Templars might have seen the need to remove these treasures from the continent entirely, taking them to places beyond the reach of kings, popes, and inquisitors. The symbolism of the Grail itself hints at a journey, not just physical, but spiritual and intellectual. Medieval texts often describe quests, voyages, and trials associated with the search for the Grail. Knights were tested in courage, wisdom, and morality. The Grail was never handed to the unworthy. It demanded effort, insight, and sometimes divine guidance. For the Templars, this motif may have mirrored their real-world voyages. Crossing the Atlantic, navigating uncharted waters, or establishing hidden outposts could have been seen as a Grail quest writ large, a journey that tested endurance, intellect, and faith while safeguarding something sacred. There are tantalizing hints that the Templars' Grail mythology was intertwined with geography. Some texts and later interpretations suggest that hidden lands existed in the West, places where sacred objects could be concealed away from human greed. While these references are cryptic, they open the door to speculation. Could the Templars have interpreted these myths literally, believing that the New World offered the perfect sanctuary for relics too precious to remain in Europe? The symbolism aligns almost perfectly with the practical capabilities of the order. They had ships, navigational knowledge, and a disciplined fleet capable of long voyages. They had motivation, secrecy, and a network of loyal knights. And perhaps most importantly, they had an unyielding belief in the importance of the mission. This belief is central to understanding why the Templars might have risked what seemed impossible. Crossing the Atlantic in the early 14th century was not an endeavor to be undertaken lightly. Storms, unknown currents, and vast stretches of uncharted ocean presented dangers far greater than those encountered in the Mediterranean or along European rivers. But for an order guided by faith and obsession, the risk may have been secondary to the imperative of the mission. To the Templars, the Grail was not a legend. It was a directive, a compass pointing toward an unknown horizon. Legends of secret voyages tied to the Grail appear sporadically in historical texts and local folklore. Tales from coastal regions speak of pale knights arriving from the west, carrying sacred objects or symbols reminiscent of Templar insignia. Some accounts describe hidden sanctuaries inland, stone buildings with unusual architecture, or cryptic carvings that resemble Templar crosses. While skeptics dismiss these as coincidence or later invention, the consistency across time and geography suggests the possibility of real undertakings, carefully concealed from the eyes of those not initiated into the Order's mysteries. The Grail also provides a psychological lens through which to view Templar voyages. The search for a sacred object is as much about the seekers as the object itself. The journey transforms the Order, tests its members, and cements loyalty. In this light, voyages across unknown oceans were not merely practical operations. They were initiatory experiences, rituals enacted in the physical realm to mirror the spiritual quest for the divine. Each ship, each crossing, each hidden outpost could have been a chapter in a living Grail narrative, blending devotion, secrecy, and exploration into one grand design. In considering the Grail as a motivating factor, we also touch on the broader theme of hidden knowledge. The Templars were not mere treasure hunters. They were guardians of information, custodians of spiritual and practical wisdom. Crossing the Atlantic may have served multiple purposes: securing sacred relics, exploring unknown lands, and establishing the groundwork for a continuity of knowledge that could survive persecution and suppression. The Grail becomes the symbol of this entire enterprise, not just the object itself, but the philosophy, discipline, and daring required to protect it. Thus, the Templars' fascination with the Grail provides a narrative thread linking legend to action, myth to practical capability. It offers a reason why one of the most powerful and secretive orders in history might have dared to sail into the unknown, risking everything in pursuit of something transcendent. When we imagine their ships leaving European ports, carrying gold, relics, and the weight of centuries of knowledge, we begin to understand the allure of the story. A tale where faith, ambition, and mystery converge on the horizon of the Atlantic, hinting at a hidden chapter of history that may never be fully revealed. The Templar fleet has long been the subject of speculation, rumor, and legend. Accounts are fragmentary, sometimes contradictory, and always tantalizing. We know from historical records that the Order maintained a network of ships, vessels used to transport knights, supplies, and treasures across the Mediterranean and along the coasts of Europe and the Holy Land. But what happened to these ships after the sudden suppression of the Order in 1307? Some vanished from port records entirely, leaving gaps in the historical record that historians have struggled to explain. These disappearances, combined with the Templars' well-documented secrecy, have fueled centuries of speculation about whether the fleet may have been used for something extraordinary, a voyage across the Atlantic into lands unknown. The logistics alone suggest the Templars were capable of far more than most scholars give them credit for. Their ships were not crude fishing vessels. They were purpose-built for both endurance and cargo capacity. Some were heavily armed, suitable for both defense and long-distance travel. Others were designed to transport large numbers of men or precious cargo. Combined with the Order's disciplined crews and extensive knowledge of maritime navigation, the fleet represents a tool of immense potential. If any medieval organization could undertake a voyage across the Atlantic, the Templars would have been among the most likely candidates. We must also consider the strategic value of such a fleet. In an era when information was as precious as gold, a fleet capable of transporting not only men and treasure, but knowledge, maps, documents, coded messages, would be invaluable. Some historians suggest that the Templars may have anticipated their persecution, preparing contingencies that allowed portions of their fleet to escape detection. If true, these ships could have carried relics, sacred texts, and even knowledge of lands beyond the horizon, hidden away from the eyes of kings and inquisitors. The very nature of the Templar suppression adds to the intrigue. Orders were given for arrests, lands were seized, and treasures were confiscated. Yet the fleet, or at least a part of it, disappears from all known records. No sinking, no capture, no official documentation explains their fate. It is as if the ships themselves have been designed not only to traverse the seas, but to vanish entirely from history. The notion of a deliberately hidden fleet aligns perfectly with the Templars' reputation for secrecy and careful planning. Could some of these ships have been prepared for a transatlantic journey, anticipating a world beyond Europe and the Mediterranean? Legends from coastal towns provide another layer of mystery. Some tell of strange ships leaving under cover of darkness, guided by pale knights bearing symbols identical to Templar crosses. Other stories describe sudden arrivals from the west, ships filled with men who spoke of distant lands, carrying objects that no local could identify. While these tales are often dismissed as folklore, their persistence across centuries and geographies raises questions. Why do such narratives recur, often with similar details, if not rooted in some fragment of truth? The Templar fleet may also have been equipped with more than just sailors and soldiers. The order was known for its engineers and skilled craftsmen. Ships could have carried not only knights and treasures, but tools, charts, and supplies necessary for long-term survival in uncharted territories. This suggests the possibility of not merely a voyage, but a planned settlement, an attempt to establish safe havens in lands unknown, protected from European powers and inquisitive eyes. The idea aligns with accounts of Templar fortresses in remote locations, and even with later legends of secret outposts across the Atlantic coast. Of course, skepticism is warranted. Crossing the Atlantic in the early 14th century was perilous, and no voyage was guaranteed to succeed. Storms, currents, and the sheer scale of the ocean made such expeditions daunting, even for the most skilled sailors. But the Templars were not ordinary seafarers. Their combination of navigational knowledge, disciplined crews, and experience from years of transport in the Mediterranean could have made them uniquely capable of long-range expeditions. And if their mission was of sufficient spiritual or strategic importance, to protect relics, secure sacred knowledge, or establish secret bases, the risk may have been seen as necessary, even honorable. Some researchers point to possible evidence of these voyages in the form of maps, rock carvings, and architectural oddities in the Americas. Crosses resembling Templar insignia, strange symbols etched into stone, and reports of fortified structures predating known European colonization suggest that at least some form of pre-Columbian contact may have occurred. If the Templar fleet indeed reached distant shores, it is possible that these men left traces subtle, concealed, and easily misattributed to later explorers that remain to this day. The disappearance of the fleet also resonates with the Templars' mastery of misdirection. Just as the Order carefully controlled access to knowledge, so too might they have orchestrated the movement of their ships to conceal their ultimate destinations. The fleet may have sailed in secret, avoiding ports, altering course under cover of night, and leaving only subtle markers for those who might follow. In this way, the Templars would not only have protected their treasures, but also created a narrative of mystery that would endure for centuries. Even in modern times, the idea of the Templar fleet sparks fascination. Scholars, adventurers, and conspiracy theorists alike speculate about its fate, constructing detailed scenarios of transatlantic voyages, hidden coves, and secret settlements. While definitive proof remains elusive, the combination of historical capability, opportunity, and motivation paints a picture that is both plausible and compelling. The fleet was not merely a set of ships. It was a vessel of ambition, secrecy, and the potential to alter the boundaries of the known world. Ultimately, the story of the Templar fleet is inseparable from the story of the order itself. Disciplined, secretive, ambitious, and daring. Their ships may have been lost to history, but the very possibility of their voyage invites us to imagine a world in which Europe's most secretive knights crossed oceans centuries before Columbus, carrying with them relics, knowledge, and the dreams of an order determined to protect what it valued most. It is in this convergence of myth, logistics, and tantalizing hints that the mystery deepens, setting the stage for what may have been one of the most audacious undertakings in human history. If the Templar fleet truly ventured across the Atlantic, what traces might they have left behind? This is where legend, artifact, and anomaly converge, creating a web of tantalizing clues that refuse to be ignored. Across North and South America, there are objects, symbols, and structures that some researchers argue could not have originated from the indigenous cultures alone, or at the very least, appear strikingly similar to European motifs, specifically those associated with the Templars. These clues are fragmentary and controversial, yet together they suggest a pattern that challenges the conventional narrative of discovery. One of the most frequently cited examples is the mysterious stone carvings scattered along the eastern coasts of Canada and the northeastern United States. These stones bear intricate crosses, sometimes accompanied by Latin inscriptions, sometimes by symbols that closely resemble Templar heraldry. In Nova Scotia, a carved stone known as the Pictou Cross has baffled historians for decades. Its geometric precision, the style of the cross, and the accompanying markings are unlike any known indigenous carvings from the region. While skeptics argue that these stones could have been produced by later European settlers, others contend that their style, weathering, and placement suggest a far earlier origin, potentially aligning with a Templar presence in the early 14th century. Further south, in the forests of Massachusetts and along the coastlines of Rhode Island, reports persist of unusual stones and structures that defy conventional explanation. Some researchers describe rock formations resembling fortifications or ceremonial markers, etched with crosses and other symbolic elements. These symbols are not merely decorative. They appear deliberately placed, suggesting a purpose that could be religious, territorial, or even navigational. When compared to Templar iconography in Europe, the similarities are striking. Crosses with equal arms, subtle embellishments, and occasionally the enigmatic motif of a circle enclosing a cross, a symbol often linked to esoteric Templar teachings. Artifacts are another layer of this enigmatic puzzle. In certain archaeological sites in Brazil, Peru, and along the Caribbean, objects resembling medieval European craftsmanship have been found, from small tools to fragments of metal with intricate designs. Some bear inscriptions in Latin or Pseudo-Latin, leading some researchers to speculate that these may be remnants of a Templar expedition. Critics dismiss these finds as anomalies or modern contamination, yet the consistency of certain stylistic elements across distant sites is difficult to ignore. Could these scattered artifacts be the faint echo of a fleet that sailed far beyond Europe's horizon, leaving behind evidence carefully hidden, yet still detectable centuries later? Churches and early chapels also provide intriguing possibilities. In parts of Mexico and Peru, certain stone churches feature architectural flourishes reminiscent of European Gothic or Romanesque styles, long before European colonization was officially documented. Some of these sites incorporate crosses and carvings consistent with Templar symbolism, often in ways that are integrated seamlessly with local stonework. While mainstream historians generally attribute these similarities to later colonization, the precision and early dating of some structures leave open the question: could Templar knowledge have influenced these sites centuries before Spanish explorers arrived? The notion of hidden inscriptions adds another layer of mystery. In some locations along the eastern seaboard of North America, researchers have reported inscriptions that appear beneath layers of moss or embedded in rock faces. Faint Latin letters, geometric patterns, and crosses similar to those found in medieval European churches. Some scholars argue that these could have been markers, guiding future explorers, marking territory, or commemorating Templar presence. Others suggest they could have had spiritual or ceremonial significance, encoding secret messages meant only for initiates of the order. In all cases, they contribute to a growing sense of unexplained patterns in the Americas that, if verified, could point toward pre-Columbian European contact. Oral traditions also add richness to the story. Indigenous communities in certain regions recount tales of pale-skinned men arriving from the sea, carrying strange symbols and performing rituals unfamiliar to local populations. While these stories have been dismissed as myth or conflation with later European explorers, their recurrence across multiple locations and cultures is notable. They hint at the possibility of encounters that were unusual, impactful, and early enough to become embedded in collective memory. The kind of encounters one might expect from a secretive group like the Templars, whose arrival would have been both sudden and highly unusual. The concept of navigation markers, or waystones, also plays a role. Some researchers propose that certain stones and carvings were deliberately placed along rivers, coastlines, and highlands to serve as guide for returning ships or for other Templar parties navigating inland. These markers, if intentional, suggest a level of planning and coordination consistent with an order that prized precision, secrecy, and long-term strategy. Unlike casual graffiti or accidental carvings, these waystones appear deliberate, echoing the kind of methodical, disciplined operations for which the Templars were famous. Even more mysterious are reports of small, isolated settlements that appear incongruous with the timeline of European colonization. Archaeologists occasionally uncover stone structures, tools, and ceremonial items that defy easy classification. Some of these discoveries feature artifacts reminiscent of European metallurgy, weaving techniques, or religious iconography. While none are definitively proven to be Templar in origin, the patterns, the symbols, the architectural motifs, and the distribution along navigable waterways raise the possibility that these were not merely random anomalies, but remnants of a calculated presence, perhaps tied to pre-Columbian exploration. Taken together, these stones, artifacts, inscriptions, oral traditions, and architectural oddities form a constellation of evidence that challenges mainstream historical assumptions. Each element is small, fragmentary, and often dismissed individually. But viewed collectively, they suggest a tantalizing possibility that the Templars, driven by spiritual purpose, strategic necessity, and an obsessive secrecy, may have left subtle yet enduring traces of their presence in the Americas. Of course, interpretation is difficult. The further back in time we look, the more fragmentary the record becomes. Weathering, natural erosion, and human activity have obscured much of what might have been visible centuries ago. Misinterpretation is easy and skepticism warranted. Yet the persistence of these anomalies, combined with historical plausibility, ships capable of oceanic voyages, navigational skill, and motive rooted in the protection of sacred knowledge, cannot be ignored. It is in this interplay between tangible clues and elusive myth that the Templar story in the Americas gains its cinematic quality. We imagine fleets navigating foggy coasts, knights leaving markers for those who might follow, symbols carved in secrecy under the gaze of an uncomprehending world. These traces are faint, yet they endure, hinting of voyages that may have been bold, strategic, and almost impossibly daring. The mystery of these artifacts, stones, and inscriptions invites a deeper question. If the Templars reached these shores, why are the traces so subtle? The answer lies in their nature. The Templars were masters of concealment, secrecy, and misdirection. They would not have built grand cities or flaunted their presence. Every cross, stone carving, and hidden marker could have been intended as a breadcrumb for the initiated, a silent testament to a journey that few were meant to understand. And it is this combination of skill, ambition, and secrecy that transforms mere historical curiosity into a compelling narrative of exploration, survival, and enduring mystery. Long before Columbus set sail across the Atlantic, another group of explorers had already ventured into northern waters. The Norse, the seafarers of Scandinavia, established settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and even reached Vinland, a land scholars believe to be part of modern-day Newfoundland. These voyages, occurring centuries before the age of exploration, demonstrate that transatlantic travel was not impossible for medieval sailors. But what if the Norse were not the only ones to navigate these icy waters? What if another, even more secretive order had gleaned knowledge from their voyages, using it as a guide for their own expeditions? This is where the Templars enter the story. The Norse expeditions were driven by necessity and curiosity. They sought land, resources, and new opportunities, and their sagas preserve the memory of these daring adventures. Vinland, described in medieval manuscripts, is depicted as a lush, fertile land with forests and rivers, inhabited by people unfamiliar to the Norse. Archaeological evidence, including Norse settlements at Lance aux Meadows, confirms these voyages took place, yet the settlements were short-lived, leaving few enduring traces. These explorations, however, may have been known to other European powers through oral reports, intercepted records, or even captured Norse seafarers who carried knowledge of lands to the west. The Templars, masters of secrecy and information, may have had access to this knowledge. During the height of their power, the order maintained extensive networks across Europe and the Mediterranean, including contacts in trade, politics, and the clergy. It is plausible that tales of distant lands, Norse discoveries, and navigational routes reached their eyes and ears. If they had the means, motivation, and maritime skill, could the Templars have used this information to venture west themselves, following in the footsteps of the Norse while avoiding the same pitfalls? Evidence of potential contact between the Templars and Norse knowledge is subtle but intriguing. Some researchers note similarities between certain Templar maps and coastal features described in Norse sagas. The precision with which the Templars may have depicted portions of North America suggests more than imaginative speculation. It implies observation, oral testimony, or access to prior knowledge that mainstream history does not usually acknowledge. Could the Templars have used the Norse as unwitting guides, translating their legends and fragmented maps into strategic routes for their own clandestine missions? The logistical capability of the Templars supports this possibility. Their fleet, disciplined crews, and experience in long-distance maritime navigation gave them an edge over ordinary sailors of the period. While the Norse relied on open-sea seamanship, knowledge of currents, and luck, the Templars may have combined these ancient techniques with careful planning, provisioning, and strategic foresight. In this sense, the Templars could have improved upon the Norse model, sailing further south, establishing temporary bases, and leaving markers to facilitate future expeditions. This theory also accounts for the seeming gaps in historical records. The Templars were masters of secrecy. Their motivations were often spiritual or esoteric rather than purely economic. Any evidence of transatlantic voyages would have been carefully hidden, disguised, or encoded to prevent discovery by hostile forces. If some Templars did follow the Norse routes, it would explain the subtle traces found along the Atlantic coast. Stone crosses, inscriptions, and artifacts that appear out of place yet are consistent with European medieval iconography. These anomalies could be the faint, deliberate footprint of a secret order operating in parallel with more documented explorers. The Norse themselves may have served as indirect teachers. The stories they carried of strange men arriving from the east or of foreign vessels on northern shores could have been interpreted and adapted by the Templars. By integrating this knowledge into their own planning, the Templars could have navigated further, avoiding the challenges that limited Norse colonization. While the Vikings ultimately abandoned Vinland due to climate, resistance from indigenous populations, or logistical difficulties, the Templars, armed with advanced planning, discipline, and motivation rooted in both sacred and practical goals, may have found ways to circumvent these obstacles. There is also the matter of timing. Norse voyages to Vinland occurred roughly around the year 1000 CE, centuries before the Templar Order reached its zenith. By the early 14th century, when the Templars were suppressed in Europe, knowledge of northern lands may have survived in fragmented form. Maps, oral accounts, and maritime traditions. It is conceivable that the Templars accessed, compiled, and expanded upon this knowledge, transforming it into actionable guidance for transatlantic exploration. In this light, the Norse provide context and possibility, not necessarily direct evidence, for Templar voyages. Yet the convergence of Norse exploration and Templar capability is tantalizing. The Atlantic, once thought impassable, had been crossed. Resources existed, routes were known, and reports of fertile land reached European ears. The Templars, with their combination of discipline, secrecy, and motivation, would have been uniquely positioned to exploit this knowledge. They could have ventured where others failed, leaving behind subtle markers, artifacts, and legends that continue to puzzle historians today. In considering these connections, we begin to see the Atlantic not as an empty void in the medieval imagination, but as a space of potential exploration, partially mapped by Norse daring, partially imagined by European scholars, and possibly traversed in secret by an order whose power and ambition rivaled kings. The intersection of Norse knowledge and Templar ambition creates a compelling narrative. The possibility of voyages that were both clandestine and methodically planned, guided by information gleaned from earlier explorers and executed with the precision for which the Templars were renowned. Through this lens, the mysterious artifacts, carvings, and legends scattered along North America's Atlantic coast begin to make sense. They are not random anomalies, but potentially the residual footprints of a secretive order using historical knowledge, maritime skill, and careful planning to navigate a world few were prepared to enter. In this interplay between Norse legacy and Templar ingenuity, the Atlantic emerges not as a barrier, but as a stage for one of history's most audacious and enigmatic possibilities, that the Templars may have sailed west, following the paths of northern explorers, yet leaving their own hidden mark for centuries to come. Beneath the quiet pines of Nova Scotia lies one of the most compelling and unsettling mysteries in North American history. Long before television crews, treasure hunters, drilling rigs, or curious tourists set foot on the island, it was a lonely patch of land shaped by wind, tide, and time. Yet, even in its untouched state, there is already something strange about Oak Island, something that didn't fit the natural order of the land around it. Early settlers spoke of unnatural depressions in the ground, curious pits that looked as though they had been methodically dug and then carefully filled. They described wooden timbers buried at depths no ordinary storm or flood could account for, and layers of material that seemed unervingly deliberate. It was as if someone long ago had built something on this small, isolated island, something meant never to be easily found. When the first recorded discovery occurred in the late 1700s, 3 young men landed on the island for what they thought would be nothing more than an afternoon's exploration. Instead, they found an indentation in the soil, a circular depression, smooth and symmetrical, as though human hands had shaped it. Above it hung a pulley stone embedded in an oak tree, a feature far too intentional to be dismissed. The young explorers dug downward, expecting perhaps a buried chest belonging to some unlucky privateer. What they found instead was far stranger. at 10 feet, a platform of oak logs. At 20, another. At 30, another still. Every layer seemed intentionally placed, almost like a staircase descending into the earth. The deeper they dug, the more unnatural the construction appeared. Coconut fibers were discovered, a material native to tropical regions thousands of miles away. Clay layers alternated with log platforms. Charcoal and putty appeared in ways that suggested waterproofing. And at roughly 90 feet, they uncovered a flat stone etched in strange symbols. A cryptic message that has been interpreted, reinterpreted, and fiercely debated for centuries. To many, this elaborate structure felt too engineered, too complex for simple pirate treasure. Pirates, after all, hid loot quickly. They did not spend years constructing flood tunnels, booby traps, or precision-layered shafts. And indeed, flood tunnels, engineered channels designed to bring seawater rushing inward, suddenly activated when the explorers reached the deeper layers. The pit filled with water so fast and so forcefully that all digging had to stop. It was clear whoever built this underground system had possessed not only technical skill, but also architectural knowledge far ahead of its time. This is where the Templar theory slips into the narrative, wrapping Oak Island in an atmosphere of sacred secrecy. According to this theory, Oak Island's strange engineering may not be the work of pirates, but rather the remnants of a desperate, clandestine operation by the surviving Knights Templar. After their order was destroyed in Europe, some believe that a portion of the Templars fled westward, first to Scotland, then possibly across the Atlantic, carrying with them relics, documents, or treasures they considered too precious to allow into the hands of their enemies. Imagine those fugitive knights crossing the cold northern sea, navigating coasts no European was officially known to have mapped, guided by ancient seafaring knowledge whispered through generations. If they truly reached Nova Scotia, they would have needed a place to hide what they carried, somewhere remote, difficult to access, and shielded from both nature and unwanted discovery. Oak Island fits this description almost perfectly. Small, uninhabited, and just far enough for major travel routes to remain unnoticed. Supporters of the Templar theory argue that only an organized, resource-rich group could have built something as sophisticated as the Money Pit. The timber platforms at precise intervals, the flood tunnel engineering, the coconut fibers acting as water filters. These are not the hallmarks of hurried pirate work. They suggest knowledge of siege, fortifications, hydraulic manipulation, and long-term concealment, fields in which the Templars were exceptionally trained. The idea that they may have constructed an underground chamber to protect their most sacred possessions is tantalizing, especially when combined with the island's location, which lies near areas associated with alleged Sinclair voyages and other pre-Columbian European contacts. Even the symbols found on the mysterious stone have led some researchers to connect Oak Island with medieval cipher practices. Although the original stone has disappeared, drawings and accounts of its markings still circulate. Some claim the characters resemble early Masonic ciphers. Others say they match symbols used in coded Templar communications. While none of these claims have been proven definitively, the symbolic ambiguity fuels the sense of something ancient lurking beneath the soil. Over the centuries, numerous items have been unearthed around the Money Pit. Fragments of parchment, old wooden structures buried deep in the earth, bits of metal of unknown origin, a stone triangle pointing inland like a marker, and inscriptions faint enough to provoke doubt, yet persistent enough to inspire belief. Each find adds a small spark to the possibility that Oak Island's story runs far deeper than colonial folklore or pirate legend. And yet, each discovery is incomplete, as though the island is deliberately holding back its final truth. Modern excavations, especially in the 20th and 21st centuries, have uncovered further evidence of massive underground works. Tunnels leading to nowhere, chambers that collapse before they can be explored, shafts intersecting other shafts built centuries apart. Oak Island has grown into a labyrinth of human attempts to unlock its original mystery, a mystery that continues to resist resolution. Treasure hunters have died, fortunes have been lost, and yet the lure remains irresistible. What makes the Templar theory so enduring is not simply the possibility of buried gold or ancient Christian relics. It is the idea that a powerful medieval order, hunted and destroyed in Europe, may have carried its legacy across the ocean and concealed it beneath a remote island. This theory ties together threads from across continents. The fleeing Templar fleet, Scottish alliances, the Sinclair voyage myths, architectural parallels, ritual symbolism, and the uncanny engineering buried beneath Nova Scotia's soil. Whether fact or folklore, Oak Island stands as a physical embodiment of historical uncertainty. It is a place where timelines blur, where tools from different eras mingle in the dark earth, and where hope persists that just one more excavation, one more chamber, one more drill hole might reveal something world-changing. The island's mystery is not merely that something might be hidden there, but that someone long ago went to extraordinary lengths to hide it. Whoever they were, pirates, nobles, explorers, or perhaps fugitive knights, they left behind a silent, intricate monument to their secret. As the Atlantic wind whispers through the trees and the tides continue their endless rhythm, Oak Island remains still, watchful, secretive, patient. Whatever lies beneath its surface has been waiting for centuries, and it may yet wait for centuries more. The structure sits quietly among the trees of Rhode Island, half hidden by centuries of foliage, its stones worn smooth by salt air and rain. Travelers stumble upon it with surprise, unsure of what they are seeing at first. A small stone tower, round and sturdy, built with an architectural confidence that seems out of place in early colonial America. Sunlight falls through its arches, casting long shadows across the ground. In the soft haze of morning, it looks almost European, almost medieval, as though it had been transported across an ocean and dropped gently into the New England soil. This is the so-called Newport Tower, a building that has sparked debate, controversy, and fascination for well over a century. Mainstream historians usually describe it simply: a colonial-era windmill built by Governor Benedict Arnold in the mid-1600s. Functional, practical, ordinary. But to others, the tower is anything but ordinary. Its rounded arcades, its thick pillars, its peculiar proportions, none of these seem particularly suited to a simple windmill. Instead, they call to mind the stark, circular churches built across Europe by the Knights Templar, structures designed with sacred geometry in mind, infused with symbolic intention, and heavily inspired by the shape of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. When visitors stand inside the Newport structure, looking upward into the empty space where a dome or upper chamber might once have been, it's easy to feel a sense of displacement. The architecture doesn't immediately match the wooden, square, practical buildings of the colonial era. It has a different rhythm, a different confidence. The stonework, though weathered, is skilled. The arches appear to be placed with deliberate spacing, and the tower's orientation, particularly the alignment of certain openings with solstices and lunar events, only deepens the mystery. Is this simply coincidence, or was the builder working from an older tradition? Some researchers argue that if one compares the Newport Tower to known medieval structures, particularly those associated with the Templars and their successor groups, the similarities are too striking to dismiss. Round churches in Europe often stood on four central pillars, supporting a second level. The design represented the unity of heaven and earth, the circle and the square. While the tower in Rhode Island is smaller and lacks a second story, the echo of that architectural language is unmistakable to those who have studied it. Could a group with access to medieval engineering principles have built it long before colonial records began? Then there are the local legends, stories whispered through generations, stories that hint at pre-Columbian visitors to the region. Some indigenous oral traditions speak of tall, armored men arriving long before the familiar waves of European colonization. Others mention structures of stone that were present before settlers arrived. These stories are rarely precise, yet they linger around the tower like a faint echo. People wonder if it might be connected to Sinclair's alleged voyage in the late 1300s, the same voyage that some believe may have introduced Templar artifacts and knowledge to the New World. One of the most persistent theories is that the Newport Tower was constructed as an observatory or marker of some kind. Architect William Penhallow, after detailed study, argued that the windows and arches align with the rising of the sun at key points of the year, particularly the winter solstice. The sunlight streams through the openings in a way that seems calculated rather than accidental. Some see this as a hallmark of European esoteric architecture, which often incorporated celestial events into sacred buildings. If the structure was designed with astronomical precision, it would challenge the idea that it was merely a colonial windmill hastily built for grinding grain. Artifacts found around the tower have only added to the enigma. Charcoal samples discovered near its base were once dated to a period earlier than colonial settlement, though subsequent tests have been debated or dismissed. Fragments of European-style tools have been uncovered in the area, but their origins remain uncertain. Some claim the stones themselves show signs of much older shaping, as if reused from an earlier, long-forgotten building. Yet each of these pieces of evidence comes wrapped in ambiguity, none strong enough to confirm a medieval origin, but none so weak as to discard entirely. The theory most intertwined with the tower is that it may have been constructed by Templars or by their successor order, possibly the Sinclair family or other groups connected to Scottish Freemasonry. According to this view, the tower was part of a settlement or temporary outpost established during an expedition to the New World, a place used for observation, ritual, or storage. Some suggest it may have been used to mark a waypoint or a navigational position, guiding those who ventured inland or sailed along the coast. If the tower had ritual significance, it might have been erected to mirror structures left behind in Scotland or mainland Europe. Still, the skeptical view remains strong. Historians point to Governor Arnold's will, which refers to his stone-built windmill, and note that circular stone mills did exist in parts of Europe during the early modern period. They argue that the simplicity of the tower's layout fits more comfortably with the colonial windmill hypothesis than with medieval ecclesiastical architecture. For skeptics, the Templar theory belongs more to romantic myth than archaeological reality. But the tower's greatest power lies not in what is certain, but in what is uncertain. Its stones resist straightforward interpretation. It feels too old to be young and too young to be ancient. It exists suspended in a historical twilight, neither fully accepted nor fully dismissed. Anyone who stands inside it feels the weight of its ambiguity. The archways hum with a kind of quiet possibility, as though they were designed to protect a story that has not yet been told. The Newport Tower keeps its secrets close. Whether it was built by early settlers, medieval explorers, or travelers whose identities are forever lost to time, it remains a silent witness to centuries of speculation. The wind passes through its empty arches. Shadows drift across the stone floor as the sun moves across the sky. And every so often, a visitor pauses inside, sensing that they are standing within the walls of something older, stranger, and far more intentional than anyone has yet proven. Across the forests, lakes, and remote valleys of North America, scattered whispers of carved stones, runic markings, medieval-style crosses, and enigmatic symbols appear like faint footprints left by travelers who may have walked this land centuries before the age of Columbus. Each artifact, whether ultimately genuine or forged, carries with it a quiet gravitational pull, drawing researchers, skeptics, dreamers, and storytellers into its orbit. These objects, sitting silently under the open sky or buried beneath layers of moss and earth, feel like fragments of a forgotten conversation between continents. They ignite imagination because they speak of possibility. The possibility that the old world reached the new not once, but perhaps many times, leaving behind faint traces that time has nearly erased. One of the most debated of these artifacts is the Kensington runestone, discovered in 1898 by a farmer named Olaf Oman in Minnesota. According to the story, he was clearing land when his son noticed a stone tangled in the roots of a tree. The stone was large, heavy, and strangely carved. When cleaned, its surface revealed runic inscriptions telling a chilling story. A Scandinavian expedition traveling deep into the continent in the year 1362. The inscription described a group of explorers, some of whom were killed by an unknown threat, while the survivors carved the stone in mourning. If true, it would imply a journey into the American interior more than a century before Columbus set sail. Skeptics argue the runes contain linguistic forms unknown in medieval Norse, suggesting a modern forgery. Yet defenders counter that regional dialects and evolving writing styles might explain the anomalies, and that Oman, an immigrant farmer, would have lacked the specialized knowledge required to produce such a convincing inscription. The stone sits between worlds, not fully authenticated, not fully dismissed. It remains an object that seems to hum with unresolved potential, as though it holds a truth that refuses to reveal itself entirely. Far to the east, near the Rhode Island coastline, lies the Narragansett runestone, a large boulder etched with mysterious characters that resemble runes. Fishermen long knew of it. The stone sat partially submerged at low tide, visible for centuries. At first glance, the markings appear ancient, worn by the sea and softened by time. Some insist they represent Norse or medieval script. Others claim they're nothing more than colonial graffiti, carved by a bored sailor or wandering settler centuries ago. The stone's most intriguing feature is its sheer stubbornness. It remained in place for so long that it became part of the landscape. When it was moved in the early 2010s, public outcry demanded its return to the exact position where it had rested for generations, as if relocating it disturbed some silent contract between land, sea, and mystery. Another set of enigmatic stones emerged in Maine, the Spirit Pond runestones. Found near a small body of water in 1971, they contain runic inscriptions, maps, and cryptic symbols. Like the Kensington stone, their authenticity is intensely debated. Scholars quickly dismiss them as modern creations. Yet some researchers insist the inscriptions reflect authentic Old Norse structures, suggesting knowledge beyond that of a casual hoaxer. What makes the Spirit Pond stones particularly captivating is the sense of narrative they carry. The marks seem purposeful, deliberate, part of a record, yet the story remains incomplete, like a torn page from a long-lost journal. Moving from stones to carvings, the Westford Knight in Massachusetts stands as one of the strangest pieces of alleged medieval evidence in North America. The carving appears to depict a figure wearing armor, holding a sword, and perhaps bearing a coat of arms. Some see it as a memorial created to honor a fallen knight from Henry Sinclair's supposed expedition to the New World in the late 1300s. Others view it as nothing more than natural rock erosion that humans later imagined into shape. But even if the grooves are faint and weathered, the site has a palpable presence. Visitors often describe the carving as something that feels older than the colonial world around it, older and somehow not aligned with the narrative taught in classrooms. Throughout Nova Scotia, particularly in areas linked to the Sinclair legends, the landscape hides carved crosses that bear uncanny resemblance to those used by medieval European orders. Some of these crosses have Templar-like proportions, long vertical lines, and short arms, often carved into bedrock or boulders. Their placement seems intentional, aligned with coastlines, facing waterways, or marking old routes used by indigenous peoples and later by settlers. Critics argue that such crosses could have been carved by missionaries in the 17th or 18th centuries. Yet researchers who favor a pre-Columbian origin point to stylistic elements that suggest older European traditions. Each cross, standing quietly against the elements, invites speculation. Were these markers for navigation? Boundary signs for an early settlement? Or silent reminders of a journey that history never acknowledged? Other artifacts add to the quiet chorus of mystery. Medieval-style metal objects have surfaced unexpectedly, small, corroded pieces that defy easy dating. Old World-style burial markers have been rumored near riverbanks. Tools resembling European forms occasionally appear in layers of soil predating known European contact. Even carbon-dated remnants of ancient structures sometimes surface, though their interpretations remain fiercely contested. None of these pieces stand alone as definitive proof, but together they create a mosaic of possibilities. A faint, fragile mosaic, but not one that can be fully ignored. Much of the debate around these artifacts centers on the human desire to uncover forgotten chapters of history. Skeptics warn that hoaxes, misinterpretations, and wishful thinking can create illusions. Believers argue that institutions have been too quick to dismiss anomalies that challenge established timelines. Between these two extremes lies a middle space where genuine curiosity lives, a willingness to consider that the truth may be more complex and more nuanced than simple acceptance or rejection. Artifacts like the Kensington Runestone or the Westford Knight command attention because they force us to question the boundaries of what we think we know. They remind us that history is not always tidy, linear, or fully preserved. Some stories vanish before they can be written. Others survive only as fractured symbols carved into granite, waiting for eyes centuries later to notice them. Even if some of these artifacts turn out to be misread, misdated, or misattributed, their cultural impact is undeniable. They encourage exploration. They challenge assumptions. They keep alive the idea that the world is still full of unanswered questions. What makes these artifacts truly powerful is not whether they confirm the presence of medieval Europeans or Templar explorers, but that they refuse to be dismissed easily. They sit in a gray zone, a space where possibility lives. Each stone, each carving, each symbol acts like a small lighthouse in the fog of history, casting brief illumination over a past that may be far richer and stranger than the official record suggests. These objects, scattered across North America, invite contemplation rather than conclusion. They suggest that the past still speaks, but in a low voice, through symbols half worn by time. They challenge us to listen a little closer, to look a little deeper, and to remember that some mysteries do not seek to be solved. They simply seek to be witnessed. There is a moment in every great historical mystery when the factual and the mythic begin to blur, when the hard lines that separate recorded events from whispered legends soften just enough for possibilities to seep through. When discussing the Knights Templar, that boundary becomes especially thin. Few organizations in history have inspired such a vast constellation of stories. Stories of underground vaults, forbidden texts, lost relics, and sacred objects whose significance transcends physical value. The idea that the Templars may have carried something extraordinary across the Atlantic, seeking refuge in a land far removed from European power, taps directly into the deepest, most persistent layer of their mythology, the guardianship of the Holy Grail. In medieval lore, the Grail was not merely a chalice. It was a symbol of divine wisdom, a vessel of hidden truth, a relic capable of shaping kingdoms. Some traditions say it was the cup used at the Last Supper. Others suggest it held the blood of Christ. Still others believe it was never an object at all, but a metaphor for enlightenment, a secret knowledge guarded through generations. The Templars became woven into these legends because of their immense secrecy, their rumored excavations beneath the Temple Mount, and the sudden, violent erasure of their order by church and crown. When powerful institutions attempt to destroy something completely, it is natural for stories to arise suggesting that not everything was lost, that something escaped. Imagine the final days before the Templar arrests of 1307. Rumors swirl through Paris. Knights disappear without explanation. Documents vanish from vaults. Treasure caravans slip out of fortified houses in the dead of night. Ships leave French ports carrying cargo no one seems able to describe. Some chronicles speak of wagons loaded with chests being moved under the cover of darkness. Others mention a fleet that departed and was never seen again. These fragments of evidence, scattered, ambiguous, and incomplete, serve as the foundation for the theory that the Templars did not merely flee. They transported something of immense importance far beyond the reach of their enemies. For those who entertain the Grail theory, the Atlantic becomes more than a geographical barrier. It becomes a sanctuary. The idea suggests that the Templars, anticipating their destruction, identified new lands to which they could escape, lands rumored through ancient seafarers' tales, or perhaps even mapped through forgotten channels of knowledge. There is a certain poetry in the thought of knights sailing westward, carrying relics wrapped in canvas and iron, guided not by hope of conquest, but by a desperate need to preserve what they believed was sacred. If such a voyage took place, what might they have brought? Some versions of the legend claim they carried the Grail itself, whether as relic or manuscript or esoteric knowledge. Others argue they brought the treasures of the Temple of Solomon, rediscovered during their excavations beneath Jerusalem centuries earlier. Still others imagine that they transported an archive of ancient texts, scrolls describing forgotten histories, mathematical knowledge, medical practices, or cosmological beliefs that the medieval church might have suppressed. The theory expands further. What if their cargo was not physical at all, but symbolic, traditions, rituals, or initiatory teachings designed to ensure their spiritual lineage survived? Picture their voyage in the mind's eye. A fleet of rugged ships moving silently across the gray surface of the northern Atlantic, sails snapping in the cold wind, hulls groaning under the weight of hidden cargo. The men aboard would have understood the significance of their mission. Some might have whispered prayers beneath their breath. Others might have stared into the horizon with a mixture of fear and determination. All would have known that they might never see Europe again. In that moment, they were no longer warriors or bankers or political pawns. They were guardians carrying something valued above their own lives. If they reached the shores of North America, a possibility supported by the Sinclair legends, indigenous oral traditions, and the scattered artifacts discussed earlier, the Templars would have needed a place to hide their precious cargo. Perhaps they sought a natural cave, reinforced it with stone, and buried their relics beneath layers of earth. Perhaps they built simple structures that blended into the environment, leaving no trace visible to outsiders. There is a haunting thought that somewhere beneath a forest, a lake, or an island lies a chamber untouched for 700 years, sealed by hands that intended it to remain hidden until the world was ready. The Oak Island theory, though controversial, gains much of its power from this idea. The elaborate engineering beneath the island, the flood tunnels, the layered platforms, the carefully constructed shafts, seems almost ceremonial in intention. Some have suggested that the underground structure might not have been built to protect gold or jewels, but to conceal a sacred object. If the Grail were not a cup but a collection of secret teachings, a manuscript, or a relic of immeasurable symbolic value, then the effort spent to hide it becomes easier to understand. Such a treasure would not have been meant for use, but for preservation. Even if the Templars did not physically bring the Grail across the sea, they might have carried the Grail tradition, the spiritual lineage that later influenced European secret societies, including Freemasonry. In this view, North America becomes a vessel for transmitting ideas rather than objects. The land serves as a blank page upon which new forms of ancient teachings could be inscribed. Some researchers argue that symbolic traces of Templar beliefs appear in early colonial architecture, in native stories that reference visitors with shining crosses, or even in the rituals of later fraternal orders. Of course, there is a gentler, more abstract interpretation as well. The Templars were known to protect knowledge that threatened existing power structures. If they sensed their downfall, perhaps they believed that the New World offered the best chance to safeguard ideas that the Old World would have destroyed. In that sense, the Grail is not a thing, but a hope that wisdom could survive political ruin, that truth could outlast tyranny. Whether taken literally or metaphorically, the Grail theory adds a layer of profound emotional depth to the story of the Templars. It transforms them from mere victims of political betrayal into stewards of something timeless. It imbues their possible voyage to North America with a purpose greater than escape. It suggests they were not simply fleeing. They were entrusting the future with the best of what they carried. Even if no definitive evidence is ever found, the power of this idea endures. It endures because it speaks to a longing that many people share, the longing to believe that wisdom survives, the longing to believe that somewhere, hidden under ancient trees or sealed beneath the quiet earth, lies a remnant of a forgotten past waiting patiently to be rediscovered. The longing to believe that even as empires fall and kingdoms crumble, the sacred continues unbroken. A hidden undercurrent runs through all long-distance exploration stories. The idea that knowledge, real, transformative knowledge, is never discovered, only remembered. In this phase of the documentary, the narrative shifts toward the deeper symbolic and esoteric dimension of the Templar question. Rather than focusing solely on maps, ships, or stone carvings, this portion explores how the Templars' worldview itself may have prepared them, philosophically, spiritually, and strategically, to reach lands beyond the edge of medieval charts. This is where ancient prophecies, forbidden manuscripts, and cross-cultural echoes create an atmosphere of profound mystery. Begin by tracing the Templars' reputation not just as warriors, but as custodians of secret wisdom. Medieval chroniclers, both friendly and hostile, describe them as guardians of arcane knowledge allegedly acquired in the Holy Land. Coded scriptures, alchemical insights, astronomical calculations, even rumored scrolls from beneath Solomon's temple. Whether factual or exaggerated, these stories highlight an organization deeply interested in hidden truths that might include the existence of distant lands. From here, transition into the idea of Templar cosmology, examining how their intellectual network connected Europe with the Islamic world, the Byzantine Empire, and earlier classical sources. Through these channels, they may have been exposed to geographical theories hinting at Western continents or islands beyond the Great Ocean. Some ancient Mediterranean traditions spoke of vast lands far to the west, Atlantis myths, Phoenician trader legends, and fragments of lost Greek geographical treatises. To a highly secretive order, such hints could have been treated as privileged intelligence, preserved in private archives inaccessible to conventional historians. Introduce the viewer to the possibility that the Templars studied the stars not merely for navigation, but for symbolic interpretation. Medieval astrology and sacred geometry often intertwined, turning celestial observation into a form of coded prophecy. Some esoteric texts from the era describe the Atlantic not as an empty void, but as a liminal space marked by specific star paths, routes followed by migratory birds, shifting winds, and seasonal currents. If the Templars possessed even fragments of this knowledge, it could frame their Western voyages not as reckless gambles, but as spiritually guided journeys aligned with cosmic rhythms. Next, guide the narrative into the realm of numerology and sacred architecture, where Templar built structures in Europe sometimes mirrored geometric patterns found later in early American ceremonial sites. While mainstream archaeology attributes these similarities to coincidence or universal mathematical principles, mystery researchers see them as fingerprints of a shared symbolic language. Present these ideas carefully, leaning into the intrigue rather than claiming proven links. Let the audience linger in the tension between skepticism and fascination. Bring in the theme of prophetic expectation, particularly the medieval belief in a land of the West tied to apocalyptic or messianic cycles. Some mystical texts circulating in the era foretold of a powerful kingdom beyond the ocean that would rise at the end of ages or serve as a sanctuary for a persecuted chosen group. Within this climate of instability, crusades failing, alliances fracturing, the church tightening its grip, the Templars may have sought new horizons not only for survival, but for fulfilling their interpretation of divine destiny. Blend this with the notion of Templar secrecy as a survival mechanism. If their organization truly embarked on a forbidden transatlantic journey, it would have been wrapped in layers of symbolic language, metaphoric diaries, and hidden markings on maps. Their silence after the suppression of the order may not indicate absence, but intentional concealment, encoded into rituals, passed orally among successor groups, or encrypted within later esoteric traditions such as the Rosicrucians and early Freemasons. Moving deeper, explore how some Native American stories, recorded much later but rooted in older oral traditions, describe pale visitors arriving centuries before Columbus, sometimes peaceful, sometimes carrying symbols resembling crosses or geometric emblems. Present these carefully, acknowledging both respectful cultural caution and the allure of cross-cultural echoes. The goal is not to appropriate or distort traditions, but to highlight the intriguing parallels that spark questions rather than provide answers. Shift into a meditative, reflective tone, considering how myth and history often blend at the frontiers of the unknown. The Templars, occupying a liminal space between monk and warrior, between faith and exploration, easily become vessels for imaginative reconstruction. Whether or not they physically reached America, the very idea reveals how strongly they symbolize the quest for forbidden knowledge, knowledge that challenges the official narrative and invites the mind to wander into uncharted seas. Conclude this section by reinforcing the atmosphere of mystery, knowledge hidden in symbols, journeys concealed in metaphors, maps encoded in geometry, and prophecies whispering from the past. In this twilight between the tangible and the intangible, the story turns from the world of documented voyages to a deeper ocean, the realm where belief, speculation, and esoteric tradition shape the contours of history itself. This sets the stage for the next movement in the narrative, where physical evidence, modern investigation, and unresolved questions collide, pushing the mystery toward its climax. As the story approaches its most mysterious edge, the narrative shifts toward the modern era, where investigators, historians, treasure hunters, indigenous knowledge keepers, and independent researchers all attempt to piece together the scattered threads of the Templar enigma. This section unfolds like a slow-burn detective chapter, quiet, atmospheric, and full of unresolved signals that refuse to fade. Here, the focus is not on medieval chronicles or old myths, but on the trail of clues that survived into the present, often in the most unexpected ways. Begin by painting a cinematic picture of modern explorers arriving at long-forgotten sites, dense forests, remote caves, wind-carved coastlines, armed not with swords and banners, but with ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, underwater drones, and archival access. Their mission is simple yet impossible: to confirm or deny a journey that allegedly happened 7 centuries ago. Many of these researchers work outside mainstream institutions, not out of rebellion, but because they feel official channels move too slowly or ignore outlier data that doesn't fit established timelines. Introduce the idea that the modern search for Templar evidence often begins with re-examining known anomalies. For example, centuries-old carvings, stone chambers, and unexplained fortifications along the Atlantic coast have been cataloged by archaeologists but interpreted through non-Templar frameworks. When viewed through a different lens, maritime symbols, crosses with specific proportions, knightly motifs, architectural signatures, the same sites begin to take on a very different character. The mystery lies not in the presence of stone structures, but in the quiet patterns they repeat across vast distances. Shift into the realm of archival hunts, where dusty manuscripts from private collections occasionally surface at auctions or estate clearances. Some of these documents contain cryptic diagrams, obscure navigational references, or references to lands westward, written long before Columbus. While not definitive proof, they serve as tantalizing breadcrumbs. Mention how historians often debate the authenticity or intention behind such texts. But the very existence of these documents fuels the belief that fragments of suppressed or overlooked knowledge have survived the collapse of the medieval world. Move to the underwater domain, where sonar scans along the North American coastline occasionally reveal shapes resembling medieval hull structures, anchors, and ballast piles. Mainstream interpretations lean toward later European fishing vessels or natural formations. But independent maritime archaeologists argue that some findings exhibit design traits older than the 15th century. Each discovery becomes a battlefield of theories, skeptics demanding stricter dating, believers highlighting overlooked anomalies, and neutral researchers urging more data while acknowledging the intriguing possibilities. Then shift the focus toward indigenous knowledge keepers, many of whom preserve oral histories that describe encounters with foreign seafarers. Not always Norse, not always Spanish, but sometimes described as armored strangers, pale but non-aggressive, who arrived in small groups and left behind unusual symbols or tools. These accounts, treated with respect and caution, introduce an important dimension: the idea that history is not always written, sometimes it is remembered. And oral memories, passed through generations, survive long after written documents decay or are destroyed. Transition softly into the skeptical perspective, giving space to modern historians who argue that no solid evidence exists to confirm a medieval European presence in America beyond the Norse settlements. This perspective is essential, not to weaken the mystery, but to deepen it by showing the contrast between official narratives and unresolved anomalies. Skeptics often point out that coincidences in symbols, structures, or mythology do not automatically prove contact. Yet even many mainstream scholars admit that history contains gaps, periods where records are incomplete, missing, or deliberately erased. From here, guide the viewer into the realm of scientific tools: carbon dating, metallurgical analysis, linguistic comparison, and genetic mapping. Each scientific discipline offers fragments of clues, though rarely straightforward. Some carvings once dated to the 15th century are later found to be older. Others previously dismissed as modern fakes turn out to be genuinely ancient. This constant push and pull creates a landscape where certainty remains elusive, and every conclusion spawns new questions. Highlight the growing network of independent researchers who share Templar-related finds online. Drone footage of forest anomalies, 3D scans of carved stones, rediscovered documents from old European monasteries. Many of these findings are raw, unpolished, and often controversial, but they collectively form a living, evolving archive of the mystery. This grassroots movement contrasts with the slow, rigid pace of academic acceptance, reinforcing the long-standing theme of hidden knowledge struggling to emerge. Then move to the psychological dimension of modern exploration. Why does the Templar in America theory continue to captivate? It taps into a universal desire to believe that history is bigger, stranger, and more interconnected than textbooks suggest. It implies that the past was not a series of isolated civilizations, but a web of secret voyages, encoded traditions, and forbidden discoveries. For many, investigating this mystery is not just about proving a voyage. It's about reclaiming a sense of wonder. Begin drawing this section toward its closing mood by returning to the idea of incomplete stories. Modern research finds just enough evidence to challenge the official narrative, but never enough to rewrite it. Stone carvings hint, but do not confess. Manuscripts whisper, but do not shout. Underwater shapes tempt, but refuse to reveal their identity. The mystery remains suspended, half revealed, half hidden, like the faint outline of a ship seen through fog at dawn. End this segment with a sense of building anticipation. Modern evidence, though scattered and ambiguous, suggests that we are on the edge of a revelation. Something in the data, the patterns, the artifacts feels deliberate, as if placed long ago for a future generation to rediscover. This rising tension points directly toward the coming climax of the documentary, where all strands, historical, esoteric, archaeological, and symbolic, finally converge into one powerful, unforgettable moment of possibility. In this climactic phase of the documentary, the narrative reaches its deepest point, where evidence, myth, speculation, and long-buried clues collide in a single, electrifying moment. This section is designed to feel like the breath before revelation, the slow turning of a key inside an ancient lock. The atmosphere should be tense but hushed, immersive yet controlled, as if the viewer is stepping into a chamber that has been sealed for centuries. Begin by drawing all the threads together. Across the documentary, we have explored medieval chronicles, archaeological anomalies, esoteric symbolism, indigenous oral histories, hidden maps, encoded manuscripts, and modern scientific investigations. Now, this section pulls everything toward a single question. If the Knights Templar did reach America before Columbus, where is the ultimate proof, and why has it remained hidden for so long? Introduce the idea that truly world-shifting knowledge is rarely found in the open. Throughout history, the most transformative discoveries, mathematics, astronomy, metallurgy, navigational breakthroughs, were carefully guarded, passed only to trusted successors. The Templars, with their complex hierarchies and secret councils, were masters of controlled knowledge. If they established contact with a distant land, their survival strategy would require absolute secrecy, especially after their persecution in Europe. This framing sets the stage for the possibility that some truths were deliberately concealed, not lost. Move into the theme of convergence, where dozens of seemingly unrelated anomalies begin to align. For instance, carvings believed to be Templar appear along the same longitudinal corridors as indigenous accounts of foreign visitors. Medieval maps with unusual western coastlines correspond curiously with oceanic currents known to favor transatlantic crossings. Architectural features in remote stone structures resemble European sacred geometry, matching Templar design traditions. Each one alone is inconclusive, but together they form a mosaic that feels too patterned to dismiss. Shift to a dramatic, cinematic moment. The hypothetical smoking gun. This could be an artifact, an engraved metal cross, an ancient map fragment, or a ship component, found deep within an American archaeological site with unmistakably medieval European traits. Present this idea not as confirmed fact, but as the kind of discovery researchers whisper about, findings in private collections, restricted access archives, or unpublished excavations. Consider describing reports of items whose existence is rumored but never officially acknowledged. adding to the conspiratorial edge without making definitive claims. From here, discuss the notion that the greatest revelations often lie not in objects, but in patterns, patterns of secrecy, migration, cultural diffusion, and symbolic crossover. Many modern scholars argue that history does not pivot on single pieces of proof, but on the weight of accumulated evidence. Others counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary verification. This tension heightens the emotional intensity of the section. The viewer is left in a state of suspended disbelief, leaning forward, waiting for the final drop of certainty. Introduce the concept of suppression, not as a villainous plot, but as a natural byproduct of institutional self-preservation. Medieval monarchies, the church, and later colonial powers all had strong incentives to control narratives of exploration. If a rival order had reached new lands first, it could undermine legitimacy, disrupt economic ambitions, or rewrite sacred history. Even in modern times, academic frameworks resist theories that challenge entrenched timelines. This is not presented as a malicious conspiracy, but as a structural force that favors stability over disruption. Then, underline the idea that some knowledge becomes invisible simply because no one is taught to look for it. A symbol misclassified as a random carving. A stone chamber dismissed as a natural formation. A chronicle mistranslated or archived without review. When a mental framework expands, forgotten clues reveal themselves, as if they were hiding in plain sight. Now shift the emotional tone. The tension peaks. The documentary reaches a point where everything, the voyages, the evidence, the legends, feels like it is circling one final revelation. And then, guide the viewer into a contemplative space. Perhaps the greatest proof of the Templars' voyage is not a single artifact, but the persistent echo of their presence across continents and centuries. Too many threads point in the same direction for the idea to fade away. Deepen the mood with the suggestion that the ultimate answer may still be buried, under centuries of soil, behind sealed vaults, or in a private archive waiting for rediscovery. Or it may lie within indigenous traditions not yet fully understood, safeguarded by communities that recognize the power of preserving ancestral stories. As the section moves toward its ending, embrace ambiguity with intention. Let the viewer feel the weight of both possibilities, the exhilarating idea that it might be true, and the equally compelling possibility that the evidence we seek has been scattered, erased, or deliberately hidden. This duality creates the emotional pinnacle, a mystery on the cusp of becoming a revelation, yet still protected by time. End with a quiet, atmospheric reflection. History has thresholds where light and shadow meet. The Templar question stands on one of those thresholds. And in this moment, poised between proof and legend, the mystery feels more alive than ever, as though waiting for the right person or the right moment to fully emerge from the past. This sets the perfect stage for the final, concluding section, where the narrative softens, widens, and reflects on the meaning of the journey rather than the certainty of the answer. As the documentary enters its final phase, the tone shifts into something softer, wider, and almost dreamlike, like drifting slowly back to shore after navigating a vast, moonlit ocean of mystery. This section is not meant to prove or persuade, but to breathe, allowing the audience to absorb the journey and its implications. After exploring centuries of hidden trails, whispered legends, and provocative clues, the closing reflection serves as a gentle descent, guiding the listener from the heights of speculation back into contemplative calm. Begin by acknowledging the emotional arc the viewer has traveled. The story started with a simple question. Could the Knights Templar have reached America before Columbus? But as the chapters unfolded, that question expanded into something much larger, about how history is written, how knowledge survives, and how much of the past remains obscured in shadows. Invite the viewer to feel the weight of those ideas, not as a burden, but as a quiet wonder. Transition into the notion that mysteries like this endure because humans are wired to seek meaning in the unknown. The possibility of a hidden voyage, a secret fleet, or lost maps is captivating not only for its historical implications, but for what it reveals about our imagination. These stories remind us that the world is still filled with unanswered questions, that even in an age of satellites and databases, entire chapters of human history remain unwritten or misunderstood. The Templar narrative becomes a symbol of that vastness. Shift toward a reflective, almost philosophical tone. Encourage the viewer to consider how history operates on different layers. The official record, the archaeological evidence, the living memory of indigenous cultures, and the myths that persist across centuries. Somewhere between these layers lies the truth, sometimes accessible, sometimes elusive. It is this liminal space between fact and folklore, between certainty and possibility, that holds the greatest fascination. Gently revisit the key themes without repeating the arguments. Mention how we explored old manuscripts, mysterious carvings, esoteric traditions, indigenous stories, unexplained artifacts, and modern scientific debates. None of these elements alone provided a definitive answer. Yet together, they created a mosaic rich in implication. This mosaic does not declare the Templars' presence in America, but it invites the viewer to consider how much more complex and interconnected the medieval world might have been than we were taught. Highlight the idea that history is not a closed book. Every generation reinterprets the past with new tools, new discoveries, and new questions. What seems impossible today may become accepted tomorrow. Countless breakthroughs, from ancient DNA analysis to LiDAR scanning of lost cities, have shown that our understanding of human history is constantly evolving. It is not unreasonable to imagine that future findings could shed clearer light on the Templar mystery as well. Shift the mood into something personal and intimate. Encourage the viewer to hold onto their sense of curiosity, not just about the Templars, but about all the untold stories that lie just beneath the surface of the world. Remind them that even if the ultimate truth remains hidden, the journey of exploration has value in itself. Wonder is a form of knowledge. Curiosity keeps history alive. Offer a moment of poetic closure. Imagine the vast Atlantic at night, the same timeless ocean that medieval sailors saw, its surface glimmering beneath the stars. Whether or not Templar ships ever crossed it, the sea remains a symbol of the unknown, deep, silent, and full of possibilities. The idea of their voyage becomes less about proving a historical event and more about embracing the mystery that lies at the edge of every horizon. Begin drawing the final arc by returning to a gentle, meditative pace. Let the viewer feel the calm settling in. After an intense journey through secret societies, hidden maps, forbidden archives, and ancient prophecies, this last section becomes a kind of exhale, a reminder that unanswered questions are not failures but invitations. They encourage us to keep listening to the whispers of history, to keep searching for the fragments that time has forgotten. Close with a sense of open-ended reflection. The Templar question may never be resolved completely, but perhaps that is precisely why it endures. It stands as a testament to human curiosity, to the thrill of exploration, and to the enduring allure of secrets buried by centuries. History, after all, is not only about what we know, it is about what we dare to imagine. End on a peaceful, cinematic note, almost like a lullaby. Let the imagery fade into the soft rustle of waves, the quiet turning of ancient pages, the distant echo of footsteps in an abandoned stone hall. The mystery rests, still unresolved, still glowing faintly like an ember in darkness. And as the documentary concludes, the viewer is left not with final answers, but with a deeper connection to the timeless question: What else might be hidden in the spaces between the known and the forgotten, waiting to be rediscovered by those who continue to look beyond the edges of the map?